Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. Listen, can't begin to tell you guys what trouble we're in the global economy. Now, I do about roughly 4 hours of research daily, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, more or less, maybe taking Christmas off or whatever. Maybe I'm a little bit obsessed with the global economy, and there's a reason why. I do my job here at Financial Turmoil Explained and my sister channel, The Delta Report, and I do it for you guys. Because we are facing a monumental crisis. And there's a lot of people out there, there's a sort of complacency now at this point. People are starting to think, hey, you know, why can't the Fed and the other central banks just keep propping this system up indefinitely and just keep this going for another 5 years, another 10 years, another 20 years? Why can't they? And this is what they think. Because of what happened in 2008. We saw, after the 2008 crisis, we saw the central banks prop up the economy, and they've kept it running until now. What you don't realize is there was a big factor involved that helped the Federal Reserve to accomplish this feat of keeping a dead economy going for another 11 or 12 years, even after it died. What people don't realize is that the world economy died in 2008. And they've been keeping it going all these years. And one of the big factors is that helped them do this was China. China is an economy that's based on export. They export to the rest of the world. The last thing that they can afford is a slowdown in the world. This trade war that's going on right now is only a minor setback for China. It's not that big a deal. What the big deal is the slowdown in the rest of the world. People aren't buying as much right now at this particular point in time. Now, what kept this economy going after the 2008 crisis was China. China went on an infrastructure program like we've never seen before. They borrowed money into the future, massive amounts of money. And they created apartment complexes on farmers' fields. Quite literally, they didn't even pave the ground. They just build it right on the mud. Buildings, skyscrapers appeared on farmers' fields with no roads even leading to them. Whole cities were built on nowhere. And during those years, when China was borrowing so much money into the future, we saw things like commodities like copper prices go way up massively, double in price. Because they use a lot of copper in construction. China was using massive amounts of rebar, concrete, copper, and everything else, building all these ghost cities in this infrastructure program. And this gave life and fuel to the world's economy after the 2008 crisis. And we had a second thing happen. We had America become a major oil producer during these years. In the shale oil industry, blossomed and grew. Well, there's a problem with both of these things. It comes to unsustainability. China cannot continue to keep on borrowing massive amounts of money into the future. It's a one-trick pony. And what I mean by that is it's like a guy that walks into a bar and he's like, everybody, drinks are on the house. Put it on my tab to the bartender. And say he does that for a whole year. And he runs up an enormous bar tab. It's a one trick. After a while, the bar owner's going to say, hey, I want this bar tab paid off. The guy says, no, I'm not going to pay it off. I'm just going to keep extending it off into the future. He says, no, wait a minute now. Before, you were in better financial shape than you are now. Now, you've lost your job, on and on and on. Things aren't going so good for you anymore. And before, you didn't have a big bar tab. Now you've got an enormous big bar tab. Pay up before I'm going to extend you more credit. This is where China is right now. They did that trick. They borrowed massive amounts of money in 3 huge pulses. The first pulse was the biggest. It came around just after the financial crisis. It was an enormous, huge borrowing of money by the Chinese economy. What's happened now is now when they borrow money, they have to borrow much smaller amounts. And it causes much more problems to their economy in general. It causes outflows of capital and devaluation of the yuan, which is their national currency. And so now they're limited. They're very limited in scope how much more that they can borrow. So don't look to China to help us out. In fact, China is going to be needing help themselves, because as this global slowdown progresses, so is the necessity and need for all of these Chinese-made goods. It's going to dry up. People aren't going to be buying as many products from China as they were before, because there's a global slowdown. As this global slowdown progresses, it's going to become more and more so that China's factory workers are going to be laid off in China. The Chinese real estate market's going to start to turn over. Prices are going to start to fall. And China's starting to go into a massive, massive decline. So we can't look to China to get us out of this mess. And what we've done is we ourselves have over-leveraged our system with debt. Unbelievable amounts of debt. And so what we have right now is we have a global economy that went through what's called a hockey stick. On charts, when something goes up, like it makes a swoop, like looks like a hockey stick, and it goes straight up. This is the way world debt is going right now. It's making that swoop like a hockey stick, and it's going almost straight up. Because that's how everything's being run now. It's being run by taking out more debt and extending this into the future. But, you know, there comes a point where a downturn comes in the world economy, and they can't let all of this implode on itself. I mean, that's unthinkable. So they have to keep it going by extending more and more credit, more and more debt. But the world is so saturated with debt, it's getting to the point so over-leveraged, it can't take on more debt. So we're at a point of inflection now, at this point, where if the central banks try to lever the system with the old methods that they've used in the past, it's not going to work. And this is why we've got a lot of economists saying, hey, you know what, the central banks are out of tools. Well, actually, they're not completely out of tools. There's one tool left. And this is unsterilized monetization of the currencies. And this is the only tool that they have left to keep this going. So there's 2 directions that they can go. They can let it all collapse, and the world will turn into an unbelievable place like you couldn't possibly imagine if they let it all completely collapse. Picture scenes from post-apocalyptic movies. You're starting to get the idea what would happen if they let it all completely collapse. And so that would also cost them maybe not even just their jobs if they let that happen. The thing is this is the unthinkable. They can't let that happen, and they know it. I mean, these people did not get in these positions of power from being stupid. Okay? Not in a position of power from being stupid. So they know what would happen to them if they let it all collapse. But now there's the opposite way, and this is this monetization of the system. To continue on with this monetization of the system. But we're at an inflection point where the old tools like quantitative easing, these old tools got to the point where there's a saying, pushing on a string, where the system has become so full of holes as far as money is concerned. So when they inject the quantitative easing now, basically what's happening is the money's going into the liquidity traps that are created by the bank. And basically what that is the banks are pilfering the money away from themselves. So no matter how much the Fed injects with quantitative easing or whatnot, a few months later the banking system needs more. So where did that money go? And well, nobody's questioning where it went. Well, the bank is just stuffing it into certain accounts and where it's just sitting there. But they're becoming richer and richer. Meanwhile, the lower to middle class people are basically being robbed blind through inflation. And this is where we're at right now. But this is going to change, because these old methods of propping the system up, like I say, aren't working anymore. So there's only one solution left, and this is direct monetization of the system. But the problem is, as soon as they start shifting, and this is called, there's another name for this direct monetization, it's helicopter money. The problem is as soon as they start shifting there, that's when we're going to see not just an uptick in inflation, we're going to see massive increases in inflation. As soon as they start to shift to this final solution. This is the final solution. It's not really a solution because it's going to create its own set of problems. But let me put it this way. If they were to let this system completely implode on itself and collapse into a deflationary event, and they do nothing about it, this world very shortly thereafter would look like a post-apocalyptic movie. And even for the best survivalists out there, life would be extremely challenging. Let's just put it that way. I do not believe they're going to let it go in that direction because of just exactly what I just said. So if they take it in the opposite direction, if they take it into this direction of basically what I've termed the Great Print, if they take it in that direction, which is the direction I believe they're going to take it in, they're going to start to create profoundly high inflation. But it's a slower way out. It's a way out that's more of their style. It's more of the kick the can down the road sort of a way of getting out of, trying to get out of this situation. And it's such a slow way out, because as the hyperinflation, which is the end result, starts, when it first starts, it's going to be inflation. And they can stay in office. However long their term is, 4 years or whatever, they can stay in office and they can continue to be the boss or be the leader, world leader or whatever they are that's making the rules and decisions. They can continue. It allows not only society to continue on, it allows them to continue on while inflation slowly starts to eat away the savers. But they don't care about you. They don't care that your savings in the bank is going to be whittled away to nothing. They don't care about that. All they care about is fulfilling their term in office, leaving with a big handshake and a big fat pension at the end of their term in office, and heading out to that house that they have in the Hamptons or wherever. That's what they care about. Okay, so this is the direction they're going to go. What's that going to look like? Now, I explained to you what a total collapse, a deflationary collapse would look like. A post-apocalyptic world and so on. What would the direction that they're most likely to take, what would that look like for us? Now, this is the interesting part. I know you guys have been sitting here a long time listening to me talk. This is the interesting part. What would that look like to us? I'll tell you exactly what it looked like. It's going to lead to, instead of, like in the other scenario, most people on Earth, except the most extreme diehard survivalists, would have a hard time surviving. But in this scenario, where they keep the system propped up with funny money, basically, the world is not going to be a place where everybody's going to basically have to be a survivalist in order to survive. No, you'll still survive. The police forces will still keep working. The power will still stay on in this scenario. People will still have their jobs. It's just that you're going to see massive inflation. And you're going to see an uptick in poverty like you've never seen before. What's going to happen is the amount of homeless people out there is going to increase exponentially. You're going to see 10 times as many homeless as you do now. And in fact, you're going to see homeless cities spring up. And the way it is right now is homeless people, they have to find a place for themselves, you know. And they'll go out and they'll encamp in a city someplace, you know, and the police will come along and they'll say, well, the people in the neighborhood here don't want you here. You're going to have to move, you know, and the police keep moving them around. That won't happen anymore because there'll be so many of them, so many homeless when this inflation comes. Now, what I'm talking about now is the inflationary, where they keep propping this system up using funny money. So anyway, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. More and more homeless people. More and more people having trouble either paying for their heat or paying for their food. They're going to have to pick. Do I pay for my heat this month or do I pay for my food? Or, you know, this is how it's going to come down to. And you can thank the world's central banks for this situation. See, back in 2008, when the system died, instead of letting it roll over into a deflationary spiral at that point in time, and it probably wouldn't have caused a catastrophe like it would now, because the system wasn't leveraged with debt like it is now. If they had let the system collapse back in 2008, a lot of these big banks would have went under. But we would have all survived it, and by now we would have had a vibrant economy. That's what if. But instead of doing that, what they did is they levered the system up with debt to try to extend and pretend. This was a huge mistake because now they've got to the point where they can't let it collapse without going into a post-apocalyptic type world. And so now the only way out is the hyperinflation way out. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of what that's going to look like, the hyperinflation, when it hits. It's basically your services, essential services, are going to stay up and running. Your electricity, police forces, and so on. But there's going to be poverty. This is going to generate poverty like we've never seen in our lifetimes before. The Great Depression type of poverty, we forget it. We forget what it was like, you know? And this is what the poverty is going to be like. It's going to be like the Great Depression. And it's going to go on for quite a while until the hyperinflation finally concludes. Ultimately, in the end, they're going to try to get out of it, the governments, by creating a new money that's like blockchain type technology and whatnot. It's going to be a move of desperation. And this new money isn't going to fare any better than the old money, because it's going to go into a hyperinflation too. And then they're going to realize that there's only one final solution, one final way out, is they're going to have to back their money with something of value. They're going to have hard money. They're going to have to go back to hard money ultimately in the end. This is the conclusion that they're going to come to. This is a long, drawn-out process. Ultimately, in the end, gold and silver are going to be worth more than anything that you could possibly imagine at the end of this process. But it's a long, drawn-out process that involves kicking the can down the road for a long time, and the world having more and more inflation. This is where we're going, people. The cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, once this process really gets started, and we're very close to it actually getting started, because we're already seeing the first signals coming from the central banks in their monetary policies. Extremely close to it getting started. Once this actually gets underway and gets started, we're only going to see prices move up, in especially gold and silver. They're probably going to catch the bid first. And then later, cryptocurrency too. And these things, gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies, if you haven't got in on this side, and you wait until the hyperinflation gets well underway, actually it's not going to start as hyperinflation. It's going to start more like really serious inflation, 1970s style inflation. If you wait until that's all getting underway and you're actually going, you're going to pay an awful lot more for your gold, silver, or cryptocurrencies, because everybody is going to be trying to get it then at that point. everybody's going to be trying to get out of what's coming at that point. Everybody's going to be able to see it. At this point, my channels are relatively small. I'm preaching the message to you guys of what's coming. You know? And, I mean, let's take a look at our Bibles, for instance. I mean, I don't often talk about the Bible and stuff, but talks about Noah in the Bible. He's preaching to all those people for years and years, a flood's coming, and they're laughing about it. They said, rain, we've never saw rain before. What's rain? You know? But then they weren't laughing when it hit. I personally believe that these are stories, very ancient stories, from a real event that actually happened a very long time ago. And these stories were written in ancient Sumeria on clay tablets, and ancient Babylon on clay tablets. A story, this flood stories, that remarkably paralleled the biblical flood story. It was a very famous story from the ancient world. Many of the tribes on earth have their own versions of the flood, what they call the flood myth. But I believe that it's ancient memories of an ancient event that occurred in our distant past, an actual event. So regardless of all this, the ultimate conclusion is our monetary system, when it starts to go down and they start to actually print all this money, faith is going to start to be lost in not only the fiat currencies, but also in the governments that issue these fiat currencies and the issuance of treasury bonds by not just the American government, but these treasury bonds are completely overpriced right now worldwide. We got like something like, I think it's like $13 trillion. Anyway, it's an awful big sum of negative issued treasury bonds out there, bonds worldwide. Even some corporate bonds are now being negative issue. You know, stuff like bonds from Greece right now, for crying out loud, are like, what could I say? Good gosh, I mean, they're like, was it, I forget what it was, like 1% or something ridiculously low. They're going to pay you for holding a Greek treasury bond, a Greek bond, you know, and it's just ridiculous because the country's broke. Well, America's broke too. They're 22 trillion or whatever in national debt, and then like 129 trillion more of unfunded liabilities. And when you heap it all together, you're talking about a broke entity. They're broke. So, but they do have a printing press. So when it starts to dawn on these bondholders that they're buying into an entity that's basically bankrupt, well, who then is going to buy these treasury bonds? And then what's going to happen to treasury yields at a certain point in time? We could see a spike, a huge spike in treasury yields worldwide. Of course, you know that the United States government now at this point in time, in order to fund their debt, in order to pay even, they're like a guy that's taking out a lot of money on his credit cards, basically. And he can't pay the minimum, just barely paying the minimum every month, you know? That's what the United States government's like now. And so if the interest rate on those treasury bonds goes way the heck up, you know, how are they going to service the debt at that point in time? So we're heading toward a massive crisis. Of course they're going to service the debt just by creating more debt. At a certain point, people start to lose confidence in them. They say, hey, you know, they've lost control over all of this. Then the rate, money costs will go up even higher. I mean, when I say a spike in treasury yields, we could go back to 20% per year on a 10-year treasury. You know? I mean, we could go to 20% per year. But what does it matter? Because they'll just print more money to cover it all. And so we're in a situation that's unparalleled in human history, and I think it's going to be a slow burn, hyperinflationary depression that's going to ultimately end in the world going back to hard money And what you're going to see is, this is how they're going to get your gold and silver. I know I just switched subjects, and now your ears are perking up, aren't they? When I say get your gold and silver. You know, there's a lot of guys out there saying, don't buy gold, don't buy silver, they'll confiscate it. Well, they are going to confiscate it. But they're not going to confiscate it the way you think they're going to confiscate it. You know, when the gold price and silver price go up astronomically high, like I think they're going to, and there's no limit, the sky's the limit to how high they can go. Well, what's going to happen is all of these people out there who are in poverty, basically they've taken the middle class and they're destroying us. They're taking all of our money away, and we're descending into poverty. A lot of us have a little bit of gold and silver. You know, might have a pair of old earrings, or you might have your grandma's wedding ring or whatever put away. And, you know, under normal circumstances, they would never be able to get that. If they come to your door and they wanted to confiscate your gold and silver, well, you know, nobody's going to give it to them, first off. You're not going to give them your grandmother's earrings. You're going to hide it away in your house someplace in the attic or whatever, you know. But, you know, as they're moving us toward this poverty in the end, it's going to come to a choice for us. Do we want to eat, or do we want to part with our grandmother's earrings? Well, most people, rather than starve completely to death, are going to part with their grandmother's earrings. And what you're going to find is, you're going to find that there's all of these little places that are going to spring up. These little, on every corner of the street, you know, right now we got stores closing left and right. There's all kinds of commercial space for lease, for rent. When gold and silver prices go to the moon, which is what they're going to do, you're going to see all sorts of these little businesses spring up. We buy gold, it's going to say on the front window. We buy gold. That's what it's going to say, right? And they're going to take their grandmother's earrings in there, and the guy's going to have a little scale. He's going to lay them on the scale. He's going to test them, see if they're real gold. And then he's going to pay out the dollars to you, you know. And I mean, just for a little set of earrings like that, he might be paying you out $80,000, and put it in a brown paper bag and slide it across the table to you, and he slides the earrings into a little pot, and he scurries into the back room with that pot. Well, when the pot gets full, it gets shipped out to the smelter, gets smelted in the gold bars, and then it heads off into the vault that's owned by the government. That's how they're going to get your gold and your silver. And you're going to get paid in hyperinflated currency. But that hyperinflated currency then is going to allow you to go and buy your $100 apple, or buy your crate of eggs for $500. You know, a dozen eggs, and your belly's going to be full that night for the first time, because you've been hungry for a long time, for the first time in ages. Meanwhile, they got your gold, and they didn't have to come to your house and bang your door down and search your house to get it either. You brought it to them. You sold it to them for their filthy paper currency. And this is how they're going to get everyone's gold and their silver. And they're going to get more that way. By doing it that way, they're going to get far more than if they tried to do it with force. That's how they're going to get your gold and your silver. And so, for these people out there who have put stackers and stuff, who stack gold and silver, they're going to be able to stay in their home and pay their taxes, sleep in their warm bed at night, and they're going to have enough money to go to the grocery store and buy their food and everything else. And it's going to be no problem for them selling their gold and their silver. There's going to be hundreds of places that spring up that'll take your gold and your silver, no questions asked, and hand you a bag full of cash. And the government is going to turn a blind eye to all of this, because where that gold and silver ends up is in the government coffers. And that's why they're going to turn a blind eye to it all. And these businesses are going to spring up everywhere when the price of gold and silver get high enough. Do you guys remember back when gold was up to $1,900? Do you remember the ads on TV? We buy gold, we buy gold. Well, what's going to happen when gold springs to $10,000 an ounce? If you thought you saw a lot of those guys out there buying gold and silver on street corners and stuff, or sometimes they set up their business only on the internet, and you have to send it to them by mail. If you thought you saw a lot of those guys spring up back then when gold hit $1,900, you ain't seen nothing yet. So, I mean, it's going to be such a demand for gold and silver when this day comes, you know, during the hyperinflation. It's not going to be like it is right now. You know, I mean, the way it is right now, you take your gold or your silver into your local coin dealer, and he's like on half mind whether he wants it or not. He's like, I don't know. I mean, unless it's a really recognized coin stuff, he's going to offer you way less than spot, and he's not really crazy about having it. You know, it's not going to be like that at all. How it's going to be is they're going to be so greedy for it, these guys that buy it, that they'll buy anything that even looks like it. You got an old fork that's silver plated. Now you take that to the coin dealer, and he just slide it back across the table to you and say, I don't want that. He says, that's only silver plating. When this day comes, they're going to be so anxious for gold and silver that they're even going to be buying stuff like old forks that are silver plating. You know, and they're not going to, of course, they're not going to pay you for the pewter that's under the silver, but they'll somehow figure out how much silver's on there, you know, like how much sterling is silver is actually on the coating, and they'll pay you for that. They'll be able to weigh it somehow. They'll figure it out, you know, and it'll be a percentage, like maybe they might figure it at 3% or something, you know, of the weight of the item. But they're going to be so desperate for it. Listen, I know I've talked a long time. I had a lot to cover in this particular issue, you know. And thank you guys for listening. Give me a thumbs up, and we'll catch you guys in the next show. Bye-bye.